which is consulting with Indian tribes about historic properties in environmental review. Did you know responsible entities must consult with Indian tribes when reviewing a project that might affect historic or prehistoric properties of significance to tribes? It has some new tools to aid in the process, a new tribal consultation protocol, an enhanced online tribal directory assessment tool, and new guidance on when to do archeological surveys. This will showcase the tools, required protocols, and best practices for effective and efficient tribal consultation. Responsible entities, environmental officers, officials working with NSP grantees, and others will find this webinar very valuable. We have with us today Nancy Boone, and helping her out in the background will be Catherine Au. And I don't think David Noguera or John Laswick are with us today. That could always change, but we definitely have Hunter Kurtz with us. So welcome to you all. And let's get show on the road. So hi, Nancy.
Hi, Ken. Thank you very much for that great introduction. I'd like to welcome everybody to today's webinar. It's something that we've been looking forward to for many months, and glad that the day is here. And we're going to cover a lot of material today fairly quickly, and we're going to look at topics related to consulting with Indian tribes in the environmental review of HUD projects. When do you consult? How do you know who to consult with? And what are the specifics of the tribal consultation process? We'll cover all those items today. As noted, HUD has just issued some new tools for tribal consultation. All of these are available online, and you'll see the web addresses soon for those. We're going to look at the notice for tribal consultation. We're going to look at a database that helps identify what tribes may be interested in the area of your project. We're going to look at new guidance on factors to be considered in deciding to undertake archaeological studies as part of HUD projects, and we're going to look at a revision of the request for release of funds certification form, on which people will now certify that they have indeed consulted with tribes as appropriate under the 706 process. A little bit of background. The webinar is meant for responsible entities, and this is the people who are reviewing HUD projects for their possible impacts on historic properties. It will also be helpful for other HUD officials and grantees. The guidance that we'll be talking about today is focused on consultation with Indian tribes, and for anyone who has a particular interest in looking at consultation with Native Hawaiian organizations, we refer you to the site on the screen here for some additional information. Go back for a minute to the origins of the historic review requirement that we're talking about. In 1966, the National Historic Preservation Act required federal agencies to consider the impact of their projects on historic properties. That requirement was contained in Section 106 of the Act, and therefore the process has become known as the Section 106 process. Implementing regulations were issued at 36 FAR Part 800, and those regulations and the National Historic Preservation Act were both incorporated by reference into HUD regulations that discuss the environmental review of HUD projects, and those are found at 24 CFR Parts 58 and Part 50. Just a reminder that as we talk about requirements for review under Section 106, not all HUD projects require such a review. So, for instance, projects that are reviewed under Part 50 and Part 58 regulations include lists of exempt activities and lists of activities that are categorically excluded and not subject to environmental review. Some examples of those types of activities include simple maintenance activities, operating costs, studies, plans, etc. It's also possible that some activities are covered by programmatic agreements, agreements that are negotiated on a state, county, or city basis that offer a streamlined process for Section 106 reviews. I should note here that a small number of NSP2 grants to nonprofit organizations are covered by program agreements. So if that applies to you, we can give you more information. In general, there is quite a bit of information about Section 106 on the HUD website at a site called ATEC, Assessment Tools for Environmental Compliance. You see the URL here. You can also just simply Google HUD ATEC, and we certainly recommend that you bookmark the site for future reference in your environmental reviews of HUD projects, because not only is there information about Section 106, but on all other environmental areas as well. Webinar, when we're done today, will be posted on that site so that it can help provide future guidance as well. Section 106, it's usually an official of the federal agency who is responsible for the environmental review. However, by law and regulation, HUD projects are treated in one of two ways. Part 50 are reviewed, our project reviews are the responsibility of HUD staff. Projects that are covered by Part 58 regulations, responsibility to a responsible entity, and that's what our focus is today. The responsible entities are state, local, or tribal governments charged with conducting the environmental review. Part 58 applies to many HUD programs, including NSP and formula grant programs like CDBG and HOME. Again, a footnote here, there is a small number of NSP2 projects, 2 nonprofits, that fall under Part 50. But in general, what we're talking about today is projects that fall under Part 58, which directs responsible entities to assume the responsibility for environmental review. The Section 106 regulations stipulate a government-to-government consultation, and by law and regulation, in many HUD projects, and those covered by Part 58, responsible entities are required to assume the role of that federal agency in environmental review, including Section 106 and tribal consultation. So this is a slide that just outlines the 4 steps of the Section 106 process, and as many of you know, in practice, sometimes the steps may be merged together. But Section 106 is a collaborative process, one where consulting parties share information at each of the steps. And in the end, the agency official, the responsible entity, decides whether to move forward with the project, even one with adverse effects. The list of consulting parties can be long, depending on the project and the historic properties involved. So today, in looking at this list for our purposes, where we're talking about the agency official, we mean the responsible entity, and in subsequent slides, you'll see that is abbreviated as RE. Other prominent players in the consulting process are the State Historic Preservation Officer, federally recognized Indian tribes, tribal historic preservation officers, local governments, organizations, and members of the public, and the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. The Advisory Council oversees the process at the federal level and provides guidance for consulting parties and sometimes participates directly in project consultations. Say just a little bit more about tribal historic preservation officers, because some federally recognized tribes have designated within the tribe a tribal historic preservation officer. And on tribal lands, that person may have assumed the role of the State Historic Preservation Officer. So in consulting with the tribe, you would consult with the THPO in lieu of the Historic Preservation Officer. There are exceptions. The Tribe Historic Preservation Officer may request that the THPO participate. A non-tribal owner of land within a reservation can request that the SHPO participate. I will point out here that HUD guidance directs responsible entities to initiate consultation with tribal leaders and TIPOs on projects off tribal lands. Just a reminder here, a visual reminder, consultation is a process, not an event. You need to allow time in your review schedule to adequately collaborate with people in looking at the project and its effects. It's advisable to start early. The process may take months. 1992, the Section 106 process has included a requirement to consult with tribes, and basically this slide illustrates what that requirement consists of. The requirement is to consult with federally recognized tribes, that includes Native Alaskans, is to consult about historic properties of religious and cultural significance to tribes, and when consult is when a project may affect historic properties of religious and cultural significance to the tribes. Definition of Indian tribe is shown here on the screen. There are over 500 tribes, including Alaska Native villages and village and regional corporations, have completed the federal recognition process. And those federally recognized tribes are the tribes who participate in Section 106 as consulting parties. This illustrates that a tribe's area of interest may not be limited to where they reside today, and consultation is required for areas where a tribe may have current interest or where they perhaps had interest many years ago. This map shows some of the migratory routes, the forced migration routes that some tribes took many years ago. It's also possible that multiple tribes have interest in the same location. And if that's the case, a responsible entity needs to invite all the tribes who have an interest in an area into the consultation process. It's also possible for the responsible entity to invite not really recognized tribes. So let's look at what you need to consult about. Here's a fairly long list, and some of it may be a little bit difficult to understand, but if we look at some examples, I think it will become clearer. It's able to archeological sites with above-ground remains of structures and villages, like you see here on the left, or archeological sites that have below-ground features and artifacts, like the pot here that you see in the foreground in the center. These things may date from thousands of years ago. Modern structures with significant tribal association can also be historic properties of religious and cultural significance tribes, as indicated here by the Indian school on the upper right. Plant and animal communities associated with tribal culture and life may be considered historic properties of religious and cultural significance to tribes, and on the lower right, we see fishermen mounted on horseback gaffing for salmon in a river in Washington State. Properties of religious and cultural significance don't necessarily have to have man-made attributes. There can be areas where ceremonies have been held on the top left, or sacred landscapes or features, as in the right, where a culture may believe that spirits of the tribe reside. Traditional cultural places like this ancient tree may be sites where elders gathered or may still gather. So there may be physical locations that don't have man-made attributes that can still be considered historic properties of religious and cultural significance. It contains a checklist on when to consult with tribes under Section 106, and I hope that you'll look at this in more detail later, but we'll take a brief look at it now. When a project involves the types of activities that are listed here, the project has the potential to affect historic properties of religious and cultural significance to tribes, and you need to ask the tribes if any such properties are present in the project area. So if we look at some examples here, if your project involves significant digging or new construction of foundations, basements, new utility lines, new access roads, grading, that kind of thing, it certainly has the potential to affect below-ground resources. Activities that may affect historic properties are on a building with significant tribal association. So if a former school, for instance, is being rehabilitated or demolished, that would be an example of a activity that had the potential to affect properties of religious and cultural significance. We may that entire landscapes can have significance. Here, one example would be new construction in undeveloped natural areas of large-scale facilities. It's also possible to have an effect by introducing visual, audible, or atmospheric changes that are out of character with the area. And here, by way of example, is a mock-up of the Cape Wind project in Nantucket Sound in Massachusetts, in which Nantucket Sound itself was judged to be a traditional cultural place of significance to tribes. Other types of activities that may affect historic properties of religious and cultural significance include the transfer or sale of properties that contain known archeological sites or burial grounds, or types of sacred places that we've been talking about, including buildings with significant tribal association. Consulting, it's important to consult early before decisions are made, and that's a mantra that you'll hear again and again throughout the Section 106 guidance, and it's an important thing to factor into your time frame for a project. On June 15, 2012, HUD issued a notice on the process for tribal consultation in projects that are reviewed under 24 CFR Part 58. And this notice provides step-by-step guidance on consulting with tribes in Section 106 reviews, and in general supplements the guidance on 106 in general that can be found on the ATEC website, the site that I referenced earlier, with the information about environmental topics. The one thing to note here is that while this notice gives great detail about how to conduct tribal consultation, it also makes allowance for use of agreements that you may already have a tribal consultation or that you may develop as you go in your relationships with tribes. So this note, it can work in tandem with existing agreements that may have already created. This is organized along the 4 steps of the 106 process. The first step is to invite a tribe to consult, but how do you know who to invite? HUD, and particularly the Office of Community Planning and Development, has revised a very helpful tool, the Tribal Directory Assessment Tool. We call it TDAT, and you see the web address here on the screen. It's something that has pulled together the information about tribes, tribal contacts, and the categories of interest that tribes have expressed. And the information was gathered in 2011. We know that it's going to be updated as time goes on. You can access information in TDAT in a number of different ways, and I'd like to describe those and illustrate those briefly. I bet you'll go online after this webinar and try this yourself by putting in addresses and queries. So it's possible in new TDAT, in TDAT version 2.0, to find contact information by putting the address of a project. So here there's a little box on the right that allows you to put in the street address, city, state, zip code, and then you hit Find Tribes, and in return a list of the tribes who have expressed an interest in the county where that project is located. And you can export it from that list to Excel, have it appear as an Excel spreadsheet, which you can then use later on for analysis or for mail merge kinds of functions. The database yields lists with entries for tribal leaders and for tribal historic preservation officers, both. You can also find information on tribal contacts by looking at states or counties of interest to you. So you can choose a county from drop-down, well, excuse me, let me back up. You can choose first a state. You can choose by clicking on that state on the map that's on the TDAT homepage, or by choosing the state's name from the list below the map. And once you've done that, it will offer you two options. It will offer you the option of choosing one county within the state to request information on, or down below you can request information on all the tribes in that state. So choose for a county, it will return a list to you of all the tribes who have expressed an interest in that county, who the tribal leaders are, who the historic preservation officers are, what their mailing address, their email address if it's available, their fax number, their work phone. The list that you get, and this is an example of a state list, this is page 1 of multiple pages of tribes with interest in the state of Wisconsin. You can print the list as well as export it to Excel, so it's something that you can print off for handy reference if you'd like. Above the map on the TDAT homepage, you can choose the name of a tribe from the drop-down list, and it will return the tribal contact info for that tribe. So you can also look things up specifically by individual tribal names. Things to note that you will also see on the TDAT homepage, and that is that there's a user manual that you can access by clicking on the link on the homepage. And also I wanted to point out that we have set up a system for receiving feedback and corrections on the data that's in the database. So we're hoping that people will indeed send new information as it changes so that we can incorporate the changes into the TDAT database so that it remains up to date. So after you've used the When to Consult with Tribes checklist to determine if you need to consult, after using TDAT, you've identified which tribes to consult. Let's look at what happens next. Using the information from TDAT, you would write a letter to the tribe and invite them to consult. We've provided a template letter. You can access it within the notice. There's a hyperlink, and you can literally mail merge with the information that you've gathered from TDAT. The letter inquires about historic properties and asks you to insert a description of the project so people will know a little bit about what you're doing. We have sample project descriptions that are available, again, in the links through the notice, and also a very good map shows where the project is located. The letter requests a response about who is the principal contact for the consultation. So the letter goes to both the tribal leader and the tribal historic preservation officer, and we ask that the response tells us who the tribe would prefer that we consult with. So after I wanted to point out that something is very important. That is that under Art 58, it is the responsibility of the responsible entity official, the head official of that responsible entity, who must initiate the consultation and who must sign the letter. The letter has to be on their letterhead. So it's something that cannot be delegated down to a consultant or a grantee. It must be done by the responsible entity official. A footnote: if someone is dealing with a project that's being reviewed under Part 50, that letter comes from the HUD official. This letter may be transmitted by regular mail, by certified mail, by email. You have a number of choices. The letter requests that the tribe respond within 30 days. And I wanted to just point out that the 30-day clock there is for the tribe to respond whether they want to participate in consultation. It's not that a tribe has to provide information within 30 days. That could very well take longer. But we're asking that they either accept or decline the invitation to consult within 30 days. If it responds with no interest or there's no response, then we will say that the tribal consultation is complete. And may also invite non-federally recognized tribes to be consenting parties, or tribes may also participate as members of the public. So moving on to the next step in Section 106, identify and evaluate historic properties. And I'm sure these steps are familiar to many of you. So in this step, you're gathering and sharing information about known and potential historic properties. You're looking at whether those properties are eligible for the National Register of Historic Places if they aren't already listed. And one very important thing here is that it recognizes that tribes possess special expertise in evaluating historic properties of religious and cultural significance to them. So keep that in mind. Rely on tribes, rely on that expertise. If parties disagree about whether something is eligible for the National Register, any party can invite the Advisory Council to consult. A tribe can also ask the Advisory Council to request that responsible entity go through a more formal process to request a determination of eligibility from the National Park Service, the people who maintain the National Register of Historic Places. And remember that National Register listing or eligibility is the threshold for consideration as an historic property under Section 106. A few about confidentiality and things that are likely to come up. In tribes, face-to-face meetings are by far the best. We know that it's not always feasible, and there are other technological ways to hold consultation, but if you have the opportunity to hold meetings face-to-face, to hold meetings on-site, we certainly encourage you to do that. Consultation with other tribes and other consulting parties, like the SHPO, certainly also recommended. Sometimes you'll find that parties don't want to meet jointly and be flexible and risk that, but try to aim to have joint consultation meetings. Sometimes the question of fees comes up, and it is not appropriate to have to pay fees to parties for consultation per se. However, you can pay for travel expenses to facilitate meetings if needed, or for consultant services like detailed survey documentation that would otherwise be provided by a consultant. Those can be eligible costs if they're approved by HUD and the grantee. A word about confidentiality. Some information that tribes may be sharing may be confidential, something that should not be distributed and available to the broader public. And if a tribe requests confidentiality on any of the information that they share, we want you to respect that request and have part of your discussion with the tribe how to ensure that you'll be able to honor their request for confidentiality. There are practical means that you can talk about making sure that it's not included in any sort of public dissemination of information or any website, that kind of thing. You can also look to state laws or federal laws for the protection that they may offer in terms of withholding information. And there is a process under federal law for that to occur, and it's detailed in the Notice on Tribal Consultation. Sometimes when you're talking with tribes, you will find that they may be unable to share information. It's inappropriate culturally for them to share certain things with you, or sometimes it may be that they have an inability to share information at a given time of year. So try to be flexible and open and continue talking and work it through. Sometimes in discussions about identifying and evaluating historic properties, the consulting parties, a tribe, tribal historic preservation officer, a state historic preservation officer, request that an archeological investigation be undertaken to identify properties. In 2012, HUD issued a revised Historization Fact Sheet number 6 with guidance on what to do archeological investigations in projects. This is available on the website and through hyperlinks in the notice. And we encourage you to take a look at it. It gives general background information and then lists some specific factors to consider in deciding whether to undertake an archeological field investigation. And we'll take a look at some of those now. you want to look at information that you're receiving. That's part of the whole point of consultation. So what are you hearing from SHPOs and from historic preservation officers and tribes? Do sources corroborate that there's a likelihood of previously undiscovered sites in the area that would merit investigation through an archaeological survey? At whether the project will have a likely impact on the potential properties. If a project won't have an impact because it's in a slightly different part of the property from where the physical impacts are occurring, for instance, it's generally not necessary to document those sites with a survey. You want to look at previous ground disturbance, previous digging that may have destroyed the integrity of the site. Archaeological sites yield information, not just artifacts, and the information that you get depends on intact deposits and features. If the ground is jumbled, that information is likely lost. You look at the likely significance of potential properties. Are the experts who are sharing their advice with you saying that they expect that these sites will yield important information that would qualify the site for the National Register of Historic Places, information about how people lived in the ancient past? You also want to look at the magnitude of the project and degree of HUD involvement. Make sure that the cost and level of effort in a survey has a logical relationship to that magnitude. Whether a project seems to be in the public interest as you balance public values of program mission and cost and other public benefits. Does this idea of doing a survey, of expending funds on the survey, appear to be in the public interest? A couple of special things to note. You want to consider whether someone has indicated that there may be human remains on property. And if that's the case, it's a very special case, and certainly recommend a survey to identify the presence and the boundaries of those burials or human remains in consultation with tribes and the State Historic Preservation Officer. There is a policy statement on affordable housing and historic preservation, some guidance that was issued by the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation that specifically ties archaeological investigations with the idea of affordable housing, and says, as you see here on the screen, that investigations should be avoided or for affordable housing projects that are limited to rehabilitation and requiring minimal ground disturbance. I want to emphasize that this policy statement refers here to new construction. Archaeological investigations should be avoided in affordable housing projects limited to rehabilitation. This does not apply to new construction. We've identified what sites there are and whether they're eligible for the National Register. You look at following the General Section 106 guidance on assessing the impacts of your project on those properties or potential properties. Here listed the criteria of adverse effect. I'm sure that many of you have used these as you've looked at Section 106 reviews in the past. You apply the criteria of adverse effect and you come up with a finding. Either there are no historic properties affected because no historic properties, or B, there are no effects. Or you may have a project that has no adverse effects. The project will have an effect on properties, but that effect is not adverse, and the project moves forward. Adverse effect, one or more of the criteria of adverse effect apply, and you need to do that further. But whatever finding you make here in Step 3, you notify all the consulting parties. Parties have 30 days to object, and we want to note that a tribe may always ask the Advisory Council to review a finding or to offer guidance. If the project will have adverse effects, you have to notify the Advisory Council, invite their participation. There's a set criteria, a list of required documentation that you need to provide so the advisory council understands what the project is all about, and then the council will respond within 15 days about whether they will participate in the consultation. The council looks at criteria for council participation that are listed in the regulations, and one of those criteria is described here. If it presents issues of concern to Indian tribes and Native Hawaiian organizations, the council may choose to step in. In adverse effects, the idea is keep talking, keep consulting, look for ways to first avoid adverse effect. And if you're successful in that, your fine may drop back to a no adverse effect finding. But if the adverse effect persists and you continue consultation to try to find ways to minimize or mitigate that adverse effect. To reach an agreement on minimizing or mitigating an adverse effect, that the consulting parties confer on a memorandum of agreement and sign a memorandum of agreement. And here on the screen, you see some breakdown on who signs. A TIPO representing a tribe on tribal lands is a required signatory. A tribal historic preservation officer or a tribal leader or other consulting party may also be invited to sign. Note that a memorandum of agreement for a project that has an adverse effect must be executed prior to the decision point for the project. Often an MOA may include mitigation measures, things that will be carried out in order to help balance off the loss of a resource or the damage of a resource in a project. And sometimes, as another excavation of a site is sometimes undertaken as mitigation, so that the information in the site is recovered if the site is lost in a construction project. But there are many other types of mitigation measures, and creativity is certainly encouraged here. And he is responsible for making sure that mitigation is carried out. And once the mitigation or stipulations are completed, it's the RE's obligation to inform the parties, including tribes, that those things have been carried out. We always hope that a consultation will end in agreement. Sometimes it doesn't happen. Very rarely it doesn't happen. And there are provisions in the law for termination of consultation. May be requested by a tribal historic preservation officer on tribal lands, or by the responsible entity, the state historic preservation officer, or the advisory council if they are participating. Generally results in final comments prepared by the advisory council on historic preservation. And a note here, tribes who are consulting about properties off tribal lands don't have the authority to terminate consultation, but they may decide to not sign an MOA. And details about termination of consultation are spelled out in the notice and in the regulations that are hyperlinked in the notice. Sometimes, after you've completed a review, surprises do occur. And in that case, if historic properties are discovered during construction, you want to stop, notify the tribes if there appear to be resources that would be of significance to tribes, consult with tribes and other parties, and read the consultation and try to resolve any adverse effects that might occur there. Discovery includes human remains. Very important to respectfully cover over the remains, secure them. In addition to notifying the consulting parties, including tribes, you should also notify local law enforcement officials. Most have laws regarding human remains and unmarked burials, and you want to make sure that whatever action you take is in compliance with those requirements. It's advisable in the case of a discovery condition like this to meet with consulting parties on site, and if you do encounter human remains, the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation's policy statement regarding treatment of burial sites, human remains, and funerary objects gives excellent guidance in how to proceed. That policy is hyperlinked in the notice. So once you have successfully completed an environmental review that includes Section 106 with tribal consultation, if needed, and you've completed environmental review in the other environmental review areas, you, as a response entity, would file a revised request for release. You would file a request for release of funds form, a 7015-15, and this form has been recently revised. And the old form, certification of compliance with all of the environmental laws and regulations, and that requirement is still on the form. You must certify that you complied with that. But a new certification has been added to the second page of the form, and it requires you to certify that you have complied with, specifically, the Section 106 process, including consultation with the State Historic Preservation Officer and Indian tribes. And naturally, you keep your notes, letters, emails, reports, etc., that show that compliance as part of the environmental review record. Are listed a number of primary resources that we hope you will use and consult, and we hope that they'll be helpful to you. The first one is the reference to the Tribal Directory Assessment Tool, and again, we encourage you to try it out after the webinar. Go online and try to use it. There is a lot of information about how to conduct Section 106, including tribal consultation tips, on HUD's website. You see two references here. There's also an excellent, newly revised online course about working effectively with tribal governments that you can access. It's presented by the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation in collaboration with the Interagency Working Group on Indian Affairs. Don't forget the people resources. As with all questions about environmental review and HUD projects, regional and field environmental officers are excellent sources of help with Section 106 and tribal consultation questions. My name and contact information is there on the bottom as a Federal Preservation Officer. Here is a page with many resources specific to the Stabilization Program, the sponsor of this webinar, and you can find very helpful information at these links here. A very quick run-through, and I want to thank you very much for your attention and interest. And now I'd like to open it up to your questions, and I turn it back to you, Kent.
Thank you much, Nancy. That's a process with a number of steps involved, and you've described them here very well. So now let me remind people how to ask questions. We're open for business, and we will spend the rest of the session answering your questions, and some are already submitted, so very good, and keep on submitting them as they occur to you. And let me, if I get this name right, Sunny says, my experience for many years is that tribes do not respond to letters or phone calls and are not very engaged in this process. Do you know if tribes are going to be made aware of the importance to respond to our inquiries? And also believe the link to the tribal letter template in the CPD notice is not reflected in the notice.
A question. I can say that, yes, we are very much planning on reaching out to tribes, and we'll be presenting a webinar particularly focused on issues of interest to tribes later in July. It's scheduled for July 25th. It's a situation that we have seen occur, and a couple of things to include in a response. It's important to make sure that the invitation to tribes to consult is coming from an official of the responsible entity, someone who speaks for the responsible entity, and not a consultant or a grantee or a sub-grantee or something like that. It really has to come directly from the responsible entity official, because they have assumed the role of the federal agency. And, you know, it's important to make all efforts possible to communicate and understand positions of both parties. Explain Assumption Authority. There's a memo on the topic on the ATEC on HUD's website. And again, look to local HUD environmental officers who may have had similar experience who can offer some advice in that kind of situation.
James says, to clarify, is it correct that the tribes listed in the TDAT and the Tribal Directory Assessment Tool are only those that are federally recognized?
Yep, correct.
And one asks, if an archaeological investigation is performed, does that substitute for the consultation with the tribe?
No, it's part of consultation because it really is an investigation to help identify whether there are historic properties present. And so it's something where we'd hope that the tribe was involved in consulting about how the investigation would occur, and certainly sharing the results and helping to evaluate the results to see if any of the properties identified were eligible for the National Register of Historic Places.
John asks, in terms of repair and replacement, such as a water or sewer line, we need to look at whether the activity will occur outside the original footprint, either deeper or wider, but the HUD checklist isn't clear.
Well, we debated about whether to include something specific about what is minimal ground disturbance and what is significant ground disturbance, and it varies so much by region of the country, by area within states, that we felt that it really wasn't appropriate to put a single type of parameter in a national document. However, there are certainly many states where tribes and responsible entities have discussed this kind of thing and have come to agreements like you're suggesting that say, oh, if you're replacing a utility line within an existing trench because it has been previously disturbed, it's so unlikely that reasons will be found there that it's nothing that people want to consult about. But that's something that you should discuss with tribes in your region to see if there are categories that would allow you to sort of fine-tune that statement about ground disturbance.
Ron asks, did I understand correctly that as a consultant for the responsible entity, I cannot send the initial consultation letter to the SHPO and the TAPO, and that it has to be on the responsible entity letterhead?
That is correct. This is particularly important tribal consultation.
Bob asks, how close to the project's APE, and you might want to, what is APE?
Stands for Area of Potential Effect. Sometimes a project will have impacts that extend beyond the actual property of the project. It may have an effect on areas surrounding the project property, and so you could have a larger area of potential effect, for instance.
Okay. Bob asks, how close to the project's APE does the historic location or site have to be considered adversely affected? If it is outside of the APE, can you refuse to do an archaeological study?
Can you read that one again? I'm not quite sure that I got it.
Sure. How close to the project's APE does the historic location or site have to be considered to be considered adversely affected? Start with that.
Well, it sounds to me like you're talking about for the definition of the area of potential effect. The resources that you're considering impacts on we're looking to see if a project is going to have impacts is within the area of potential effects. So if saying there's some area outside that might be affected by a project, then that's telling me that maybe your area of potential effects is too small and you need to broaden it to include that area that might be affected by the project.
let's see. Bob asks, who usually pays for the archaeological study, the entity or the developer?
Oftentimes, a developer will do an archaeological study as part of pre-project planning. They want to investigate possibility of sites in an area, and they'll ahead of time if they've done some planning that indicates, in talking with the historic preservation officer or with consulting or talking with tribes, that may be areas of concern there. They may do it ahead of time. If a project, and in that case, obviously the developer, the applicant would pay for it. The project expenses that would be associated with archaeological investigations would be considered part of the project expense. So there would be a discussion about the project expense coming out of the HUD award. Then to stop the developer from using other funds to also fund that.
Jennifer is interested in step 1 of the consultation, and the tribe does not respond to the request to accept or decline the consultation. Does the response period extend beyond 30 days, or does it end at the 30 days?
If the response at all, we're saying that it would end after 30 days. They haven't heard anything at all. Tribes receive many requests for consultation, and time to respond to all of them.
Leonard asks, is the impact of plowing for crop production sufficient ground disturbance to dismiss the need for an archaeological investigation?
It depends on where that plowing takes place. In some instances, plowing could affect sources, and in other instances, there might be resources well below the plow zone where plowing would have not harmed those resources, and they could still be expected to exist. So again, there's something where it might make sense within a region or within a state to talk with tribes and to talk with the State Historic Preservation Office about whether there are some rule of thumb types of measurements that people could use about when there's much ground disturbance, when ground disturbance is likely to have destroyed a site.
In a related question, Catherine asks, could you provide a little more information on minor ground disturbance? Example, for rehab projects, where only ground disturbance will be updating existing landscaping, is consultation needed, assuming there are no other triggers?
That would be considered minimal, I would say.
Can you provide examples of the type of tribal consultation information which could be considered to be confidential?
Some of the things that I have heard are locations where, for instance, materials for making baskets or for gathering tribal medicines, those kinds of locations might be something that a tribe would want to hold as confidential, so that people in the general public would not think that it was okay to go there and a resource. There might be instances where some sort of ceremony or ritual was a very private thing for the tribe, and they are not at liberty to give details about what that ritual or celebration or is all about.
Thanks for the question, Laura. Earth says that the new 7015.15 certification form states that the responsible entity has assumed responsibilities, including tribal consultation. This is not conditioned as appropriate. Is the certification understood to mean that the responsible entity has consulted as appropriate? And Bob asks, is there an approved list of archaeologists who are qualified to perform digs?
Many state historic preservation offices maintain lists of qualified consultants, and that would be the first call I would make if I were looking for a qualified archaeological consultant.
I hope that helps, Bob. And Catherine asks, on the consultation coming from the responsible entity official, can that be delegated to internal staff, or must the certifying officer sign the consultation letters?
I think it would be a good idea for the actual certifying officer to be the one who signs the letter to tribes. I don't want it to be a matter of dispute whether the correct person has signed the letter. It should be the official who signs on behalf of the responsible entity.
Sarah asks for clarification on the bullet point regarding having to go through the consultation process for construction of affordable housing.
That bullet point is included within the Advisory Council's policy statement on affordable housing. And it is a narrow policy statement, and it's meant to augment and give further guidance in relation to Section 106. So basically it says, is directing people in affordable housing projects that are limited to rehabilitation, that are limited to projects with minimal ground disturbance, that archaeological investigations should not occur. And there's to that, but that is the general guidance coming from the Advisory Council.
And scanning here. And take a moment to remind people that this webinar is being recorded and will be archived on the NSP website. And I believe there will also be a link to it on her sites that Nancy works with as well. And it'll include an AV recording of this presentation, and a PDF version of the presentation, and takes a little bit longer, but there will be a transcript that's posted there too, a written transcript of the entire webinar. So feel free to use in the future and to refer others to that site who might have wanted to be here and couldn't be today. Laura asks, when there is an adverse effect, but the project includes appropriate mitigation, is RE allowed to make a finding of no significant impact without notice to or additional consultation with the Advisory Council?
That's a question that's really outside the realm of tribal consultation and is more directly related to the environmental review process in general. So I think I would defer to the regional environmental officers and program officers on that.
It says that the Indian tribe and DHPO, Tribal Historic Preservation Officer representative that we currently contact, is not listed for our county on TDAT. Are we required to continue consulting this tribe?
If a federally recognized tribe, please give the information and we'll get them on TDAT, and yes, you should be consulting.
Tom says, we checked with the state of Virginia on the TDAT, and Hampton, Virginia is not listed. Does that mean we have no tribal properties in our area?
Did you check since yesterday? Because the revised information went up yesterday. So that would be the first question that I would ask back. And in general, I mean, this also relates to the previous question. If they upon which all of the tribes were contacted in many cases numerous times to confirm the counties of interest and the appropriate and accurate information for tribal contacts, and if things changed or if something was missed in that work, we want to be aware of it. And so if you'll alert us to the correct information, we'll make sure that gets into TDAT. and I would just say that sort of what we're thinking is that if the information comes in from tribes, we'll assume that it is accurate coming in. If it comes in from someone else, we will check and confirm with the tribe and then put it in TDAT.
Dave, one clarification on ground disturbance. So what you're saying is that ground disturbance in the guidance is truly that, regardless of whether or not the ground has been disturbed?
Obvious ground disturbance is something to be considered, and so the end of previous ground disturbance is something to talk about in consultation. In the area where you're located, is the previous ground disturbance that's happened, has it been documented? Are people sure that it's happened? Has it been extensive? Has it gotten down far enough into the ground that it has impinged on the areas at the depth where you would expect to find sites, that kind of thing? So it's part of the local conversation about whether to undertake a survey.
Gabriel asks if tribal contact is indicated within TDAT for the respective project or for the county. Is it safe to assume that the tribal consultation is not necessary?
Yes, we have to go with the assumption that we've got a complete database. Now, in the beginning, as we're transitioning into using this, if you have information that indicates that there's missing information from TDAT, we want to get it into TDAT, and we want to advise you to consult with those people who you know of, who are tribes with an interest in your area. But at the same time, we want to be sure to get that updated information into TDAT now.
Vern's question is the time allowing Indian tribes 30 days to respond in addition to the 30-day limitation for SHPO and THPO?
To consult is sort of something that happens at the beginning of the process, and you can be inviting the other consulting parties into the process at the same time. You can be beginning to gather information and checking in with the State Historic Preservation Office about what information they may have on existing sites or potential sites. So I think what we're trying to stress is that this days is specifically related to inviting tribes to consult. It may very well overlap with other time frames, but this one we want to make sure is understood as its own 30 days.
Let's see. I lost my place here. Give me just a second. There we are. The tribes asked for an archeological study with no information about what they think the area is significant. Is that lack of info sufficient to refuse to do the study?
No, it's not. I think that in that kind of situation, you need to engage in a conversation so that you'll learn why you're making that recommendation, and you can discuss the aspects the factors that are outlined in that new Historic Preservation Fact Sheet number 6, talk about it together with the tribe, and get fuller understanding to be able to make an informed decision.
Okay. And find this again. Sorry for the pause. There we go. Kimberly says we have a few housing structures that were built in the 1920s and have been designated as blighted structures and public nuisances and ordered for demolition. They're not in a designated historic district, and we would like to use CDBG funds demo. Do we have to go through this process?
You have to ask yourself whether you have to go through the process, and again, this is a much broader question. But in general, if you have that kind of a project, you want to look to see if there's a programmatic agreement, for instance, that covers the project that would give you some streamlined process that you could use that might, for instance, exempt certain activities from having to go through review. That might very well be the case. It's certainly the case in a lot of the land banking activities that are going on. So it's you establish whether you need to do a review and then look at whether the types of activities that you're undertaking are types of activities that may affect historic properties of religious and cultural significance. And at that point, then you see whether you need to consult with tribe. It may very well be that you don't have to.
In a similar vein, Dave asks, if you can answer no to all the items under when to consult, do you still need to consult?
No. That's the point of the checklist.
James wondering when the consultation begins. Does the 30-day clock begin with mail letter, or do we need to estimate when the tribe receives it?
It's 30 days from the receipt of the letter, so that suggests several things. Suggests that you can email a PDF copy of the letter, and they would assume that the person received it on the day that you sent it. You can send it certified mail. Then you get a response back from the post office the date that it was received. You can also, if you live in an area where mail delivery is predictable, you can assume that 5 days after you have the letter, you can assume that it has been received.
Gloria mentions that the principal chief in one database is different from what's in the TDAT.
I wonder, certainly are other databases out there of contacts. Bureau of Indian Affairs has a database, and other organizations have databases. What we're going to do is to consolidate all the current information for our responsible entities and others. So if you find that there seems to be a conflict, no, and we'll resolve it.
We have a tribe state to us that they have 60 days to respond to notices. Would we have to accept this, or could we stand firm with the 30 days?
Well, I think we're going to be talking with the tribes about the 30 days in the notice and why we've set that. And I mean, at this point, I think we would encourage you to talk with tribes and say that there's new guidance coming out. Encourage them to be on the lookout for this tribal consultation webinar that we'll be putting on July 25th, where we'll get into a lot of this information and detail and sharing.
Very good. And Laura asks, should we expect that since the certifying officer will need to sign the tribal consultation letter, that he or she is also required to sign the SHPO consultation letters?
I said in a number of programs, in a number of instances, there has been practice and past protocol in which others have sent the letters to the state historic preservation officers, and so this notice, because limited to tribal consultation, doesn't necessarily override that kind of previous protocol or established practice. But this is a practice that we are saying must be followed for tribal consultation.
Jennifer is wondering if the tribe agrees to be part of the consultation process, is there a time limit they have for responding?
No, there are not specific time frames. I think the important thing is to keep communicating, to tribes know the deadlines that you're working in your program and in the project, and what the parameters are, what affect the schedule, and I think that in collaborative process, people kind of information, work out a schedule that can work for all parties.
Stephanie asks, if there are several tribes listed that have interest in projects in our county, do we consult with all of them?
Yes.
And Zex asks, what is the appropriate evaluation of request for a tribal representative to be present during construction excavation, especially where no archeological investigation was determined necessary per HP fact sheet 6?
Interesting question. You would expect that there was at least some indication of sites there for someone to suggest that there be a monitor during construction. So it sounds to me like that kind of situation might be the result of a discussion about an archeological investigation where there seemed to be perhaps not enough evidence to suggest that a survey was needed, but there was still interest on the part of the parties to provide some measure of assurance that if any sites were found, they was appropriately and quickly. So to me, that kind of situation might might be arrived at as part of a consultation process. There isn't a guidance that would say, yes, you can do this, no, you can't do this. I would say that it's something that people could discuss under consultation.
And take a moment here to let you know what's coming up in terms of NSP webinars. These two are on the schedule. One next week, one in July. I know more will be added to the schedule, and we hope to see you at some of those if they look like something that you could benefit from. And so when you are, when we're done with this webinar, you'll be automatically directed to a survey form, a short evaluation, and we'd very much appreciate you taking a couple of minutes to answer the questions there, and any written comments you have are especially helpful. And thank you in advance for doing that. Back to the questions. John says, assuming that TDAT could be updated regularly, if a grantee contacted tribes as of a certain date, then if new tribes are added after that 30-day period, do the additional tribes need to be contacted as well?
If them, contact them.
And I hope I get your name, Ed Keisha, who says, I am working on a neighborhood-wide project that is located within a historic district. Is there some way I could consult for the entire project, or have to consult on each step/property as they come across my desk for environmental review?
A situation like that is one that sounds ripe for consideration as a group, and where you could look at the area and the kinds of impacts kinds of activities that were going to be undertaken, the kind of impacts that would be expected from the project, and talk about the properties as a group and consult them as a group.
Asks that you please clarify that even in the event that an area has experienced previous ground disturbance, human remains are known, discovered, or likely to be present, they will still need to be dealt with appropriately.
Each time that human remains are discovered, it's a very special circumstance that has to be addressed respectfully, quickly, with the consulting parties and with law enforcement officials.
And Meg asks, is it safe to say that we should go to TDAT for all projects to ensure a tribe is covered?
That the list is meant to narrow down where your includes the kinds of activities that would impact properties of concern to tribes. So I would say that the checklist is something that you do first, and if the checklist indicates, yes, there are activities that are going to occur as part of my project that might have the potential to affect historic properties of concern to tribes, then you want to ask the tribes whether indeed there are historic properties in the area.
Let's see. Yeah, that one's been answered. Tracy says, to be clear, it is only the certifying officer that can sign the tribal invitation to consult letter, or can the individual who consistently conducts the overall environmental review process sign the tribal invitation to consult letter if they are an RE employee? And
this is, I think, the fourth time that this has come up in the question, one time or another. So it indicates to me that it's of great concern. And my answer was that the certifying official would be the one who should sign. And what I'm gathering from the mentions on this topic, I'm gathering that maybe people are thinking that could be a problem. And so, I mean, it's something that we continue to discuss, but I think in the notice we're assuming that it would be the certifying official, and if that is problematic, then let's talk more about it.
I'm sitting for additional questions. Let's see. Hunter, are you there?
Yes.
Very good. There was one here that might have something to say about. Let me find it. Will participation in this webinar be listed as eligible for CM credits with the American Institute of Certified Planners, or the APA?
I don't know. Sorry.
I would chime in that that's nothing that we set ahead of time, and I think that in order to get CE credit, you have to have it set up ahead of time. It's a good idea for the next time, though, isn't it?
I think that sounds right to me. Thanks for that question, Mike.
Sorry to help there.
That's okay. Let's see. So scanning, and at the moment I see no more questions. Nancy, if you have any final remarks, or Hunter?
I'll jump in and just thank people for participating, for showing your interest in this topic. It's something of primary concern to us here at HUD, and I know to you as well. And we're hoping that this new guidance will help make it easier to consult with tribes, to engage in meaningful consultation and discussions with tribes, and to have projects that protect cultural values as well as meeting the program goals that we all care about. So thank you for your participation, and look forward to working in the future.
In the meantime, we have gotten a couple more questions, and since we have a lot of time left, let's go and ask this. So Dave says, if you're no to all of the items under when to consult, do you still need to consult? And as I recall, the answer to that was no, because you've gone through the checklist.
Correct.
Very good. And okay. In response to the question about credit for this, James mentions that planners can get CM credit under the self-study option through AICP. So good, thank you for that, James. Jennifer asks, do all of the individuals listed on TDAT need to be contacted, or just the certifying individual?
Just certifying individual. The TDAT lists one or two contacts for each tribe. It always lists the tribal leader, the president etc. And sometimes if the tribe has a tribal historic preservation officer, it lists all tribal preservation officer. And you get to contact both.
Gloria is wondering, where can she find the sample letter?
It is hyperlinked in the notice, and I would say that if you go to the ATEC website, all the hyperlinks were effective as of yesterday. So go to the ATEC website, Google HUD ATEC, and you will find the tribal notice on that website. You'll find the tribal directory assessment tool on that website. And notice that's there includes all the active hyperlinks.
This question is it possible to piggyback off the programmatic agreement we have with the SHPO as a responsible entity under Part 58 with the federally recognized tribe who has expressed an interest in our county jurisdiction?
Yes. And I think that in some jurisdictions there will be existing programmatics that address tribal consultation that come into play. As I said at the beginning, quickly, the notice does not guide any existing agreements that you may have worked out. And if you want to, subsequent to the notice, work on agreements with the tribes, we'd encourage you to do that. And those agreements can be programmatic agreements in a formal sense, or I know that some states work with written but less formal agreements about particular topics like extent of ground disturbance and that kind of thing.
Vern wonders if local SHPOs have been informed about the new guidelines.
They're on our list, but they have not received the distribution of this yet. Our first, well, as you heard at the beginning, the notice came out on June 15th, which was last Friday. So we first wanted to relay the information to HUD staff and responsible entities, and we'll be distributing it to much more broadly, including state historic preservation officers and the tribes very shortly.
So it does look like we now have come to the end of our questions. Nancy, thank you very much for your time in helping to make this process as transparent as possible for folks in the NSP program. And let's see, and the questions do keep coming in. Let me mind taking another one.
Nope.
Okay, so Pamela says, after the initial invitation to consult signed by the RE official, can all other communication then be between delegated environmental reviewers directly?
That's part of what you establish in that initial invitation to consult. I mean, if a consultant, if a tribe says, yes, we do want to consult, part of the discussion is, okay, who's going to consult on your part? And, are you willing to work with so-and-so on our part? And just establishing who the parties will be who actually sound together or talk on the phone.
Great. Again, thanks everybody for being with us today. Hope you found this as informative as I did. Thank you, Nancy, for all your work on this. And,
thank you.
Look for the webinar archive posted soon. And just a reminder to please take a moment to answer the few questions in the survey that you'll be automatically directed to when you leave or once this event is over. So thanks, everyone, and hope to see you soon on another NSP webinar. Take care, everyone.